And then I find out that prediabetes and type 2 diabetes is the source root cause of all these other major killers, the silent diseases. It's your source of heart attacks, strokes, cancers, PCOS, which I have a whole chapter on, amputations, sleep apnea. You've got your blindness and cataracts. So just the list goes on and on. And that was the reason why I had the cardiovascular disease.
Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. In 1930, the obesity rate in the United States was only 1%. However, today that number has skyrocketed to almost 50%. This rapid increase in obesity rates is unprecedented and has significant implications for the health of our country. So, what exactly is causing the epidemic of obesity and related health issues? Today's guest believes that the culprit lies in our diet, specifically in the consumption of carbohydrates, sugar, and seed oils. These three components have become staples in the modern American diet, and their overconsumption has been linked to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic conditions. Carbohydrates, especially refined ones like white bread and pasta, are quickly converted into sugar in the body, leading to spikes in blood sugar levels and eventually weight gain. Sugar found in processed foods and drinks has been shown to contribute to obesity and metabolic disorders. Seed oils, such as vegetable and soybean oil, are high in unhealthy fats that can provide inflammation to our bodies and insulin resistance, both of which are risk factors for obesity as well. By understanding the role that carbs, sugar, and seed oils play in our diet and health, we can make informed choices about what we eat and take steps to prevent these conditions like obesity and diabetes. So, to help us, I have invited today's guest to provide some context. And that guest is Daniel Trevor. Daniel, when faced with heart disease, did some investigative journalism to find out why. In his book, The Unholy Trinity, he debunked some of the common myths about the relationship between heart disease and metabolic health and argues that the unholy trinity, including carbs, sugar, and vegetable oils, should be avoided. Today, we will discuss some of the principles he shares in his book, Unholy Trinity, so that we all can use those insights to chart a better future. And with that, Daniel, I'm so excited to have you on the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Tony. I really appreciate you having me. It's just, I have great respect. And, I've seen some of your videos on your channel. And, we have mutual friends with Dr. Ken Berry, Dr. Philip Ovadia, Kerry Mann, Vinny Tortorich. I mean, the whole crew. I've been on their podcast too. And it's really a pleasure to finally meet you and go over all that. All these things that you're starting out, and oh my God, that opening with the 1% in 1930, and that blew my mind. Because let me first say this before we start out for you, because I haven't told you this yet, and your audience, is that I am basically just a lower class street kid from Philly, right? Grew up poor and everything, so I'm a little rough around the edges. So try not to hold it against me, okay? But look, and even I was really kind of scared. I got a funny story when I was going to be on. I was talking to Dr. Ken Berry's crew, and I said because I was kind of new to all this book interview stuff, right, early in the year because the book had just come out, and I said, okay, so how many subscribers does he have, or how many? Oh, he's got 3.7 million on YouTube, and he's got more on social media. I went, oh my God. I said, okay, so if I mess up, we can go back and edit that part out, right? Oh no, it's a live stream. I went, holy shit. They said, what's the matter? I went, oh, well, I did write the book and I do know the data, but knowing the data and running it smoothly over my tongue in a professional way, that's a little different. Oh, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. So I thought, what the hell? Let me just dive into it. And that podcast is what really put the book on the map and just like, wow. And I was really thankful. I mean, I could have been smoother in a few places. So if I'm not so smooth, then, try not to hold it against me. But yeah, that stat you gave about, 30%. In 1930, the obesity rate was 1%. Today, we're approaching 50%. It's just, oh my God. It's just, the book is basically a how-to book on how I reverse 4 comorbidities, which I'll get into. It's also a bit of an expose on big food, big pharma, and big medicine.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, I'm sure there's beautiful, wonderful people in all three, right? And so I'm not disparaging everybody in those, but there are certain sectors of each that are just um, not in our favor. Let's just put it that way. And also, the other thing is that it's also a bit of a what you would call a situation and data analysis. I come from a business world after I grew up and was an entrepreneur of this, of that, what you just said. How did this happen? And never before in human history has a population gotten so fat and so sick so fast. You got to say, what the hell is happening? And when you pull the strings and you do the analysis, it's the introduction of all these fake foods in the 20th century that we never had before. I mean, we started off 1900. That was when the first Hershey's bar was made, right? 1900, the first year of that, so we got, I mean, sugar's been around a long time, right? I mean, it was invented in India. I found a reference. It was first referenced in this religious text called Atharva Veda, and that goes back 900 to 1200 BC. But we've never had the sugar and the grains in such quantities and amounts like we do now. And what they do to them to process them makes them even more um, dangerous for these evolutionarily developed meat bodies that we have, because, we never had any of this in our diet prior to 100 years ago. And then you mentioned the seed oils. Those are I had no idea. See, what happened to me was, here's my story. About 4 years ago, I almost died from a heart attack, right? I had an MI, myocardial infarction, and I thought I was Mr. Healthy. I was a slim, symptom free Mr. Healthy, or so I thought, but I later found out that I was one of the small percentages that can be on the lean side and have all these comorbidities, which I'll get
Mhm.
into. So I definitely had the heart disease. I had a heart attack and I almost died. And here's something to keep in mind for all your audience. It's called the golden hour. They call it in the medical field, as you know. If you suspect you're having something weird, and it's usually in the top part of your body that you're having some sensation. What I had, my symptoms were, I was starting to feel sensations in my throat area, kind of like what you might feel at the beginning of a cold or a flu, but then cold sweats came, and something I knew was really weird. And luckily, I was right across the street from one of the top heart hospitals in the country. So I went in there and they quickly drew some blood, and they found that my troponin, which is protein, is way higher than it was supposed to be, plus a 12.8 EKG. And so I had to go through that. And it was shocking to me because, see, I had studied technical data all my life, so I felt comfortable in taking the dive into the medical and nutrition science to find out how the hell could this happen to me.
Right.
And
Right.
so what I discovered, like I said, it absolutely shocked and infuriated me. And I thought, I have to share this with my fellow human beings. I mean, I'm discovering all this stuff. It's like, what? They knew all the time this was the case, but they're telling us this. See, I was like most people. I was just, I learned my nutrition from headlines,
Mhm.
But then,
Right.
even then, it's like, this week coffee is bad, and that's next week coffee's good, and it's like, I didn't, I just knew that I would get to the gym and I'd work out and that kind of thing, and that's probably what saved me and pushed it off. I should have, because cardiovascular disease runs in my family big time. My mom had the heart attacks. My dad had the stroke. So I knew I should have had it probably in my late 30s, but the fact I got to the gym, at least did some working out, that pushed it off. So anyway, I decided to write this, and it was just shocking what I found, and um, like that.
It's very shocking. And that's why our role is to create awareness. In fact, you mentioned Nina Taisho. So I interacted with her just yesterday, and her, along with some others, are going to Washington in October on the 13th. And it's called the Metabolic Revolution. So it's metabolicrevolution.org. It'll be the first metabolic rally. ever to spread this message that if you achieve metabolic health, you don't have to worry about holding your chest because of a heart attack. Or at least when you do, you'll be so old it won't matter. So this is really important no matter what platform we're on, whether we're at a conference, a rally, a podcast, a YouTube channel like Dr. Barry's. We have to spread this message. And the truth be told, you're not the only person who gets their nutrition advice from the headlines. The doctors do too. so
I
welcome to
know.
the club. And it's ridiculous. So we have to spread this word. And one of the things I want to ask you is, at what point from the moment you felt your symptoms to being next to this wonderful hospital, when did the fear kick in? Because once you realize it's a heart attack, did that change anything for you in that moment?
Well, yeah, it's just, first of all, I don't know what it is. I just know it's very unusual for this slim symptom free person to have this. And so I was freaking out. Hey, I'm not, let me just walk in. And so I did. And then when they told me that, that's when it was like shocking to me. And I was never more highly motivated to dig into something than then. Because, see, I was fortunate to, even though I grew up in a, like I said, a lower class street kid from Philly, I was fortunate to early on learn how to study well. I learned how to conquer dictionaries and so forth. And you have to conquer the terminology and the nomenclature if you're really going to get into something, or even if you're reading an article online or a newspaper or anything. You'll come across a word and you don't know what it means. And if you keep going, you're going to get to the bottom of the page. You're going to be blank, right? And you're going to go, oh, you got to go back and go, okay, so I got what he's saying here. I got what he's saying there. But what is this catheter? I don't know what that is. And you got to clear it up. And you don't even have to use dictionaries these days. You can go, hey, Siri, what's the definition of the word catheter?
That's right. That's right.
She's showing it to me now.
Right.
Catheter, a flexible tube inserted through a narrow opening into a body cavity, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so
Right.
fine.
That's crazy.
So you have that, and it may seem like a painstaking process, but the more you do it, the less you have to do it,
That's right.
right? Because
That's
you get
right.
now. The reason I bring that up is because in the book, I wrote it for the average reader of health and wellness. I didn't write it for doctors. I mean, even doctors need this data more than the average person, as
Yeah,
you
that's
well
right.
know, because they don't get this anywhere. Because the big pharma is one who funds the medical schools, right? They underwrite the medical. They want them reaching for the prescription pad. Right? They don't want them talking to the patient about their diet and their exercise. It's like, are you getting to the gym? Are you walking? Are you what but then at the same time, when you take your little poochie to the veterinarian, what's one of the first questions they ask? Hey, so what are you feeding little poochie
That's the
these
first
days?
question. That's right.
So you just don't get that conversation. And with the average visit to a doctor, especially in a hospital or someplace, a clinic, is 7 minutes. How much can you accomplish there? So everything that you're doing is just amazing. But yeah, so I had that, and I dove into the science, and like I said before, I had so many moments where I went, "Wow, they have really fooled us
That's right.
so much." And it reminds me of this great quote from Mark Twain from the 19th century author and Mr. Common Sense, and he had this saying, Mark Twain. He said, "It's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled." It's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled, because once they get these ideas in their mind and go, "Oh, well, my doctor told me," and the doctor, he has a white jacket, right? He must knows all, sees all.
That's right.
And yet the doctor, I mean, I was telling this one cardiologist not long ago, I said, "Yeah, well," he says, "Well, how's your LDL?" I said, "Well, it's out the roof, but I'm a lean mass hyper responder." He looked at me like you're a lean mass what? He looked at me like I had two heads, right?
That's right.
I said, "Yeah, but my HDL is 98, my triglycerides are 38," and he didn't know. He
You
couldn't.
didn't have,
He
yeah,
didn't know. He didn't know the five basic metabolic markers: the HDL, triglycerides, A1C, the you know, and so it was like, oh my god! And this guy's a cardiologist, and he's running this practice, and I'm thinking anyway, but I had moved to
we have a long way to go, my friend. I mean,
yeah.
I meet some colleagues later today who I went to not medical school, but my residency with. So if we end up talking about nutrition or anything, because we are going to be having dinner, it'd be interesting to get a sense of what they know. I mean, these are brilliant people. I was at one of the top residencies for family medicine in the country. Some of them
Wow.
went to Yale, places like that, and yet I would be shocked if they knew this, right? So we have a lot of work to do. This is why we're going to be having rallies and stuff, and hopefully we'll end up with the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. We'll be able to, with our outreach committee, which I'm involved in, be able to get into the medical schools, get into the American Medical Association type organizations to get this message out. Because again, it's a little embarrassing that they would know. What's also intriguing about your journey is that you had this life-changing moment and you somehow discovered low carb. So where did that come from?
Well, after I had the heart attack, I really needed to find out. So I went to Google University and YouTube University and PubMed and all these studies and books and everything. And I found these medical geniuses and nutritional geniuses on the cutting edge of medical and nutritional science, 21st century science, not the old stuff. And, people like yourself, Dr. Ken Berry, Dr. Eric Berg, Dr. Ford Brewer. Dr. Ford, I did when I discovered him. I reached out to him. He's for your audience. He is an internationally acclaimed preventive medicine expert out of Johns Hopkins, and he is brilliant at all the tests. Right. So I reached out to him. I said, I'm writing this book, but he didn't know who I was, so I had to send him portions of it. I said, I would love it if you would write me a chapter, one chapter delineating what are the most important blood labs and scans that anyone can buy inexpensively online without needing a doctor's prescription. That way, you yourself can find out if you've got something lurking inside, ready to pounce, or you're just fine, or somewhere in between where it needs attention. Because sometimes what you'll do is you'll hear about a test and you'll go to your doctor. Hey, doc, I'd like to get this test here that I heard about on YouTube, or Google I read about, or this other test. But your doctor might be one of those has a little sign on the wall that says, don't confuse your Google search with my medical degree.
Right,
You got lucky enough to get one of those guys. It's
right,
like, oh man, you want your patients to be interested in, right? So, okay, so you ask them, hey, I want this test. A lot of times what will happen is the doctor will say, oh, no, you don't need that. You're fine. You
oh
don't
yeah,
need that. And the only reason they're saying that is because they don't know what it is. They
that's right.
wouldn't know how to analyze it in the first place. And the last thing doctors want is to get homework from their patients, right?
Right.
It's like, oh my God, it's just crazy. So you can buy them yourself online. There's one really important one. See, what happened to me was I discovered that I was a raging type 2 diabetic. How can that be? I'm on the slim side. I'm one of the 1% that could be on the slim side because usually the first sign of prediabetes or type 2 diabetes is you're overweight. That's the first sign. And see, what can happen is you can have normal readings. Many, many, many people can have normal readings on fasting blood glucose and fasting A1C. And your doctor will look at, hey, you're good. I'll see you in a year. Wrong. They don't do this other test, which is, I cover it in chapter 7. I call it the most important health test you've never had
That's
because
right.
doctors don't order it, right? And what that test is, as you well know, is the OGTT with insulin, oral glucose tolerance test with insulin. And
Yeah,
doctors don't order it. And that's what will tell you, even though I had normal blood glucose fasting and fasting A1C, I was a raging type 2 diabetic and I didn't know it. I was kind of like Dr. Peter Attia. He got his type 2 diabetes from drinking so much Gatorade, and he was an incredible athlete, with the
right.
triathlons and all that. And so it was like, what? And then I find out that prediabetes and type 2 diabetes is the source root cause of all these other major killers, the silent diseases. It's your source of heart attacks, strokes, cancers, PCOS, which I have a whole chapter on, amputations, sleep apnea. You've got your blindness and cataracts. So just the list goes on and on. And that was the reason why I had the cardiovascular disease, because we go back to Dr. Joseph Kraft from the 70s and 80s, and he was the he was the father of the insulin assay, as well as an expert pathologist. He had done thousands of autopsies, and he was the one that discovered that the process of diabetes is atherosclerotic, right? And he even wrote a book. It was like way back in 1980. It was called "The Diabetes Epidemic and You." I mean, it's got to be at least 3 times as big now, right? 300% more now. And he was the one that discovered all that. And he had this quote. It was something like, those with cardiovascular disease not associated with diabetes are simply undiagnosed. Because even back then they didn't know how to diagnose it properly. And here's a shocking one that should be shocking for your audience. There was a study just in the last few years out of Johns Hopkins, and they discovered that 74% of doctors, now we're talking internists, GPs and family physicians and cardiologists, 74% do not know how to properly diagnose or test for prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. It's just what? And I was just talking on the podcast with Dr. Ford, and it was no wonder it's a silent epidemic. People just don't know. They go, "Oh, my fasting blood glucose is fine." I mean, even the American Diabetes Association will tell you that you're going to miss a lot of patients if you just
Right.
do those two,
That's
right?
right. Well, I'm just happy your background allowed you to be a little bit more, data driven and to find the best way to collect the data. And I think so many people can't rely on that background because they don't have it, which is why our clinicians, our doctors, our pharmacists, our nutrition professionals, and others have to be given this tool of knowledge. And if you want to get the most return on investment, you impact the thing that has the biggest impact on our health. And in many cases, it's excessive consumption of the unholy trinity that you suggest
Exactly.
in your book. So let's go into some of the concepts that you shared as a preview. So for those who are checking us out, pause the video, go to Amazon, get the book. But if you're still curious and you want to learn some of the talking points that my guest shared, let's answer some of those questions. And I want to start with one of the questions that most of us are concerned about is, we definitely want to have a quality life, but we also want to have longevity. So if you were to meet somebody in the elevator and they ask you, what's the best predictor of longevity? What would you tell them?
Well, hey, look, like I say in the book, none of this is Daniel's opinion. This is all scientific research from people much smarter than me that are clinicians like you that actually see patients, and they're also scientists, right? So again, it's not because I say in the introduction, somewhere in the beginning, I just say, look, I know you're probably thinking, hey, without medical degrees and all that, why the hell should I trust you? And I say, don't. Just think of me as a friendly relay point of what the best of 21st century science has to offer for your health and wellness,
That's
and
right.
fix yourself.
That's
I
right.
did. I almost died. I had 4 comorbidities. You already heard about 2 of them, and then so anyway, pardon me. They found that the best predictor, because centenarians, they study centenarians.
That's right.
What is it about them that the best predictors of longevity? These researchers, that I have at least a half a dozen studies in the book about that, are normal insulin levels and normal glucose levels. So it's a glucose and insulin. They're insulin sensitive. That's why you have hardly any centenarians. It's very, very rare for any of them to have any heart disease because they don't eat this modern food. They just, it's just crazy. And so that is the short answer to your short question there. Because I get into that very early. In fact, in page 2 of chapter 1, I get into the fact that you have to know about the two most fundamental players in the processing of the food that you put in your mouth, and that is glucose and insulin. You eat something, your glucose goes up, the pancreas senses it, it emits some or secretes insulin to come in and bring it down. And it's a wonderful, beautiful process, and it keeps it in a safe range and like that. But if you're eating these high carbohydrates and foods that are constantly keeping them up there, and your insulin is up there, it's like that's what pretty soon what happens is the cells in your body come to reject or resist the insulin because of the overload. There's just too much. I go, oh no, we're full. It's like trying to close a suitcase on your way to the airport, right? You're trying to, you just can't get any more in. And so that's what's called insulin resistance or hyperinsulinemia, which is hyper too much insulin. Emia means in the blood, hyperinsulinemia. So that's what that means. So when that happens and you've got this elevated glucose and insulin hour after hour, day after day, week after week, you develop these states. And this is the beginning of your prediabetes and then type 2 diabetes. And then because they lead to so many of the silent killers, I've labeled it the gateway disease. Prediabetes and type 2 diabetes are the gateway disease, right? Because it leads to all these others, because that's what, without all this insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, centenarians are able to live long, healthy lives.
Yeah, I completely agree. Those high glucose levels floating around in your blood will absolutely lead to high insulin levels. And high insulin levels wreaks havoc when excessive. We need insulin, but we don't need excessive insulin. And so we have this cascade of effects, constriction and inflammation, and even retaining salt to the excess. The damage to the nerves through a process called glycation is significant, and our nerves. So yeah, and if you think about arteries and nerves being everywhere in the body, it's going to affect every part of your body. So it's just really scary to not know this, and it's great to know it because then you say, well, if I can reduce the things that spike my glucose and my insulin, I am on my way to increasing the odds substantially that I'll live a longer, healthy life. So I appreciate that longevity question. Another thing that is part of the education of a doctor like myself in my conventional training is this concern about cholesterol, because we were trained that if you build up cholesterol in your body, if you have too much, you're going to create plaques in your arteries. They're going to narrow your arteries and it's going to block the flow of blood. That'll then increase your risk for a heart attack. That'll increase your risk for a stroke. That'll increase the risk for peripheral artery disease where the lower extremities are clogged. Your blood vessels become stiff because of plaques. So now you got a high blood pressure and all the negative consequences of that. So I have a two-part question for you here. Why do people, in spite of that, with high cholesterol live the longest? And the second part of the question, why do people with low cholesterol have shorter lives? Those are two questions that are contradictory to everything that the metabolic health doc was taught. And I had to go to YouTube and Google University just like you to learn otherwise, which is embarrassing. But tell us a little bit about those.
Oh my God. Yeah. Hey, well, listen, you hear it from this person. He's got a white jacket, right? And so there you go. Knows all, sees all. Look, I can't, a lot of the doctors, I can't blame them because that's what they were taught. And many times they can't be the doctor and healer that they want to be, or that they want, that they wanted to turn out to be early on when they first got into it. They're going to help people and all like that. And they thought they were learning the real deal. And instead of all this false information about, well, from the idea that the big pharma wants them reaching for the prescription pad.
That's right.
So there's drugs and procedures, more drugs and more procedures, right? And it's the high cholesterol. We need it because these evolutionarily developed bodies, We've been eating meat for, no, this is not my opinion again. This is anthropologists and bioarchaeologists, anywhere from 2.6 to 4.5 million years. That's an awful long time. Our diet consisted of what we could catch, kill, and eat. And what we occasionally would pick off a tree or a vine, that kind of thing, but only when it was in season. But it was mostly, like that. Um, let's say you and I were out hunting 12,000 years ago and we'd come across some berries that had just come into season for a few weeks. Oh my God, we'd go tell Uncle Throgmagog and he'd tell the tribe and we'd all go eat some berries for a while. No big deal. It's okay, good. We got to use our brains about this. We can't think, oh, well, I'm on the carnivore diet. I'm not, I'm not supposed to do that. No, we ate what we could when it was available, that kind of thing. But it was mostly meat. It was a high fat, high protein, low carbohydrate diet. So we naturally had higher cholesterol. And they proved that in the Framingham study that the those with high cholesterol lived the longest, and those with the low cholesterol died much earlier, and usually of some form of cancer. And especially testosterone. I mean, for the guys, you can't. I just sent out an email to my list. I think it was a day or two ago. Yeah, it was low cholesterol equals low testosterone. And I say, listen, ladies, I know. Let me have a word with the men for a minute. But if you know somebody, pass this on to them. Cholesterol is a precursor to testosterone. You can't have testosterone unless you have plenty of, and also when you're taking a statin that lowers, the side effects can be just brutal, especially like brain fog and road rage and just, psychoses. You lose at least 20 or 30 IQ points. And that's because statins are very effective at lowering cholesterol, which the brain needs lots of. That's why you get stupid on a statin. So, and oh my God, if I could just tell you this one study about the statins, patients want to know, how much longer can I live if I take a statin every day for the rest of my life, which is what my doctor and certainly Big Pharma wants me to do, right? So the researchers set out to find that out. I got this study from Dr. Robert Lustig, and they found that the researchers wanted to know the same thing. How much longer do people live if they take a statin every day? So they looked into it, and it was a big one. It was 92,135 patients. They followed them over a long time. And they found that those in the group taking statins for primary prevention, in other words, no heart attack yet, they're just taking it because their doctor says something goofy thing about LDL or total cholesterol. So those in the group that were taking it for primary prevention, no heart attack yet, they lived a mere 3 days longer than those in the other group not taking a statin. And those in the group taking statins for secondary prevention, in other words, they already had a heart attack, they lived a big 4 days longer than those in the other group not taking a statin. So I asked my readers in the book, I say, you still want to put up with the nasty side effects from taking statins? Because like I said, they can be pretty nasty for some people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's my chapter 18. I cover a lot about statins and so forth. And because it's basically all about inflammation.
Right.
Statins do reduce inflammation, but what you want to do is instead of taking a high dose, which is what the big pharma and your doctor will prescribe, take 5 milligrams of rosuvastatin every
Right.
other day,
Right.
twice a week. There are
That's right.
studies showing that if you did that, it really does handle the inflammation, which is the culprit, as you know. If you just there's a study showing that it was effective in reducing inflammation if you take it 3 times a week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, twice a week, and even once a week, 5 milligrams instead of 40 or 80, right?
That's right.
So I'm not bad mouthing. I give my whole spiel about statins and that because I had my own experience because they had me on 80 milligrams of atorvastatin, Lipitor, and I felt like a dunce.
Yeah, you're not
I
gonna feel
just felt
good.
so shy, and I still was continuing my research. And then I found out about the whole idea is you want to reduce the inflammation,
That's
and
right.
that low dose Crestor, rosuvastatin, can do that.
Yeah, and I think those nuances will provide cover for people who are trying to honor their doctor who is conventional, who may not know much about what we're talking about. But it also, you know, in some cases, for those who want to reduce the risk of your risk for diabetes is higher when you take a statin. You may have some cognitive issues that result from statins. And we just talked about testosterone. Nobody wants to. I had a patient who saw a dramatic drop in their testosterone level on a statin that was given to them by the specialist. And I think in this case, the cardiologist. And it went from maybe it was at, it wasn't, it was probably 500, went down to like 200 or so. And when
Wow.
they stopped it, along with doing a keto diet, in this case, it went up to 600 or so, maybe 700 in a person who was already 70 years old. So it was such a dramatic impact that I didn't have to sell the idea that maybe the statin wasn't the best drug for that person. Now, if he had heard the data, the 3 days longer for primary and 4 days longer for secondary prevention, it would have been even more of he would have been more convinced. And I do want to also add, when I mentioned the metabolic revolution, when we have our rally, Dr. Lustig will be there. In fact, he'll be probably our premier speaker. So I'm really excited about that. I hadn't met him in person, but I will meet him in person on October 13th. So another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is always something that's true to my heart, which is why my first book, Fix Your Diet, Fix Your Diabetes, really focuses on diabetes, because I understood that there's this connection between all the things diabetes can do to your body and heart disease. So as it relates to the importance of reversing type 2 diabetes and its relationship to heart disease, explain that connection a little bit for those who want to hear that.
Okay. Well, the diabetes physiology, you have, by the time you've gotten pre-diabetic or diabetic, you have a lot of inflammation going on. And that's because if we back up, like what we were talking about before, glucose, insulin, it's up. You got hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance, and that turns into your diabetic physiology state. And it also coincides with all the inflammation. And the inflammation starts in the arteries. And the arteries, of course, go through the entire body. And then depending on your genetic background, what, your parents had, your grandparents had, it will then regenerate whatever you have in those genes that you are wearing currently in your body that you have. And that's the direction it will take, whether it's going down the cataracts and the blindness, the Alzheimer's, the heart attacks, the strokes. So it starts vascularly first.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why that's why heart disease is the biggest killer globally
Yeah,
of humans. Heart
yeah,
attacks and strokes. I mean, check this out. 20th century, we didn't have prior to the 20th century, we didn't have the unholy trinity. And by the way, the book is called Unholy Trinity, and the subtitle is How Carbs, Sugar, and Oils Make Us Fat, Sick, and Addicted,
that's
and
right.
How to Escape Their Grip. How
That's
carbs,
right.
sugar, and oils make us fat, sick, and addicted, and how to escape their grip. Because it is a bit of a how-to book. Because a lot of people they don't know how. They need the tips and the tricks. And okay, so how do I get from point A to point B without a snack? How do I get from noon to dinner without a snack? Those kind of things. But so you build up all these. What happens is this. In the first couple of chapters, I give the history of how we got here, right? How did we get to this position where in 1900 we died of infectious diseases, tuberculosis, influenza, that kind of thing, right? And now by the 1950s, it became heart disease. The very first officially medically recorded heart attack wasn't until 1912. Now it's like, and by the time the 50s came around, I have a chart in the book because I have a lot of charts and images and pictures and photos and that kind of thing, where the graph goes from 1900s down here and up here is 1955. So what happened in 1955 was President Eisenhower had a heart attack, and it was a big deal because a lot of people were dropping dead in the prime of their life, men, women, both. And they were looking at, and there was this joker that came along named Ansel Keys. I'm sure you know about him, who was a very unethical but very influential researcher. And he said, oh, it's the butter and the meat and the cheese that was clogging things up. And that's what caused the heart disease. And it's not that way at all. It's not that way at all. I mean, he gave the analogy was like, oh, it's kind of like a shower drain that clogs up with the hair and the grease and the soap and the gook, and it all gets, it's not that way at all, right? What happens is what they discovered years later when they had this, they developed electron microscopy where they had these little teeny tiny cameras they could snake up into the arteries, right? They discovered this thing called the glycocalyx. What is that? The glycocalyx is this fuzz-like lining on the lining of the arteries that acts as the first line of protection against what's called pattern B, small dense LDL particles from invading the artery wall, which they can do through this process called transcytosis, as you know, and they get stuck underneath. It's not, underneath the artery, and they build up there over time in this, what's called the intima media space. And then what happens later on, after a certain number of years, it can rupture through the damaged endothelial, which is the lining of the artery. This plaque, this soft inflamed plaque, spills into the lumen where the blood flows, touches blood, creates a clot, goes downstream, so to speak. And if it goes to your heart, you have a heart attack. If it goes to your brain, you have a stroke. So it's not just in your heart. It can happen. It's systemic. It can happen anywhere in your body, right? Where the plaque buildup is. So that's what happens. That's the long story of what happens. I mean, I could go deeper that, but I don't want to get too sciencey for your audience. But anyway, so that's what happens in a heart attack or stroke. And so, what we need to understand is that these predispositions that we might have through our genetics, you have to always remember that genetics loads the gun, but
That's
it's
right.
lifestyle that pulls the trigger or keeps the safety on.
That's right.
Genetics load the gun, and lifestyle pulls the trigger. And of course, lifestyle, we mean sleep, exercise, stress, that kind of thing. But it's mostly what you put in your mouth.
That's
So if
right.
you put in a lot of unholy trinity and the carbs, the sugar, and oils, you're going to destroy the glycocalyx, and then it will go through your body, the inflammation, and it will regenerate or stimulate whatever you got lurking in your genes,
That's right.
and that kind of thing. So it's I don't know if I went a little too deep there for
Well,
you.
actually, I want you to go deeper, and what I mean by that is, it's a little. Sometimes when we hear, uh, carb, sugar, and seed oil, we forget about how sneaky industry is. And what they do is they'll say, "Man, the doctor told you to eat a whole lot of fiber, so we have an answer for you. We're going to give you uh, products made of wheat. We're going to give you products that are essentially grains because you got to get your fiber in." So my question to you is, what's wrong with that recommendation?
Well, I'll tell you. Let me just put a period at the end of what I just said before about the destroying the glycocalyx. What they found was that smoking destroys the glycocalyx, and that was huge back then. Almost half the population was smoking. Doctors smoked around their patients.
Right,
It was
that's
like
right.
it was just, and Eisenhower, he was 3 packs a day, right? That destroys the glycocalyx. And what they discovered years later is that there's a much more destructive element to the glycocalyx, and that's the carbohydrates from refined grains and sugars.
Oh wow,
So we've
yeah.
replaced one destroyer of the glycocalyx with one that's even worse. So
Hmm.
anyway, yeah. Well, what you got to really understand is the whole area of wheat and grains. Now, he goes, "Oh, come on, wheat. It's been around. We first started eating wheat and grains about 9,000 years ago, right? And anthropologists and bioarchaeologists tell us we used it as fallback food when animals were not available. We would, the clever humans found out that if they ground up the seeds to these plants, these grains, because that's what they are. They're the seeds. That's where they get the grains from. And they added some water, heated up. They made like something like a porridge, right? And it allowed them to survive an extra day, week, or month. But their health and wellness took a serious toll. I have a picture of a guy. Well, guy, it's his skull. He's from 100,000 years ago, and he got perfect teeth, right?
Yeah.
Perfect teeth. And so I asked the reader, I said, "Do you think he had an orthodontist, floss 3 times a day?" And no. So what happened was, what they discovered is when they were started exhuming bodies from after we started eating wheat, like from 10,000 years ago, towards the present, they found tooth decay, missing teeth, all these new diseases that they were coming in. Not like the last 100 years, not as bad as that, but all these, their bone diameter and length shrunk. Men shrunk 5 inches, women shrunk 3 inches. I mean, it was just a disaster. And the modern wheat that we have that just came around in, let's see, Big Ag came along in the late 60s, early 70s, and they had this, they wanted to get a more bountiful crop from it. How do we get more from it? And so what they did was they made this thing called it used to be shoulder height, right? Now it's 18 inches. They call it semi-dwarf wheat. And they use this process called chemical mutagenesis and radiation mutagenesis. What does that do? It amps up this chemical called gliadin, Gliadin, gliadin. What does that do? It attaches to the opiate receptors of the brain, the same opiate receptors as morphine and what's the other one? Morphine and heroin, right? Now, they don't get you high or they don't relieve pain, but what they do is they make you crave more of the things that have wheat and grains in them, like the bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, chips, pretzels, rolls, pizza, tortillas, and on, right? So that is just really wild. They're really coming after our opiate receptors. Check out this stat. The average supermarket has 60,000 products, right? Over 59,000 of them have wheat or some form of wheat in them. And in my chapter 10, where I talk about this, I give all the aliases. So you got to be careful reading your products. I mean, reading your ingredients, right? Even Twizzlers, the candy, the second ingredient, wheat. So, like I said, they're really coming after our opiate receptors. And, carbs do not satisfy appetite, they stimulate it.
Wow, that's well, I know that's true from the experience I've seen in my patients, and I am not interested in making my patients suffer more by trying to adopt these changes. And they're always hungry, and that's one of the biggest barriers to achieving success when you're making changes: hunger. And I do want to say that Professor Tim Noakes in South Africa with the Nutrition Network is how I learned about a lot of the concepts you just shared in terms of the teeth and your diet. And I really appreciate the Nutrition Network for helping to spread that message. So I'm going to ask one more question, because I think my audience is going to, really learn a lot from your book. And I just want to tee it up with some of these questions, because they're very important questions that need to be answered. And the last question is the connection between your blood sugar and cancer. I've had a chance to talk about this on my YouTube channel. Dr. Paul Merrick did a monograph which talked about the connection, but anything you can share from your research about why high blood sugars and cancer are bad, and you should stay away from high blood sugars if you want to prevent or heal from cancer.
Yeah, especially if you got it running in your family, right? If that's what your predisposition is, you definitely
That's
got to
right.
do that. Well,
That's
the
right.
basic idea is what you have to understand, and a lot of people don't realize, is that cancer loves sugar.
Yes,
Sugar is cancer's food.
that's right.
Dr. Thomas Seyfried, I'm sure you know the doctor, and he's big on all that, and he discovered all that too. That's why he's just so connected with the metabolic syndrome, and how that is you're at risk for cancer with that, because they have this, and that's how they detect it. Even in the medical field, they detect it with the PET scan. What is it, positron, where they inject radioactive
Yeah. Positive emission.
glucose.
Yeah.
And they want to, that way they can detect where the cancer is. If
That's
there's a
right.
tumor, what's going, because then it lights up. They can
That's
see
right.
it on the scan, right? It lights
Right.
up and go, wow, there's it, because we're following the sugar. Cancer
Mhm.
loves sugar.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and sugar, you got to you got to remember, one of my big things, reason why I got off the rails was, see, I wasn't eating Twinkies, and I didn't, I wasn't, I knew enough of the headline, the good stuff, that it was,
Right.
I wasn't eating Hershey's bars and stuff like that. But my problem was, I was totally sold on the bullshit propaganda of, air quotes coming at you, heart healthy whole grains.
Right. Of course.
I didn't know that these whole grains, when you put them in your body, that they turn into sugar.
It
I
sure
didn't know
did.
any of that. I
That's
was
right.
oblivious. Like I said, I was like a lot of your patients, that they didn't know. I mean, they're just listening to their doctor. Oh yeah, eat heart healthy whole grains. Even the American Heart Association will tell you that. It's like, oh my God, but what does it do to your blood sugar? You gotta either get tested a lot, or wear a CGM,
Right.
continuous glucose
That's right.
monitor.
Right.
And I even did that after a while, because I wanted to find out, because I understand that some people, certain things can raise your blood glucose higher than other people. We're all different, right? We have all different backgrounds, and that kind of thing. So CGM, I'm sure you've talked to your patients about that, continuous glucose monitor, because if you eat something and then an hour later, 45 minutes to an hour later, your blood sugar is sky high, that your insulin is going in, and that you got to look back on that meal and go, okay, so what was the sugar or the carbohydrate that I need to either eliminate or drastically reduce,
That's
that
right.
kind of thing. So anyway, cancer loves sugar in the form of carbohydrates, and refined sugar.
That's right. So for those who are concerned about cancer, definitely check out Dr. Seyfried. And again,
Oh yeah.
if you search my name and cancer on YouTube, you'll see a few videos where we talk about cancer as well, and how we don't want to feed it with sugar. So as we kind of wrap up, and I really have enjoyed sharing you with my audience, nothing but respect that you're out here doing this work and spreading this message. When it comes to your life and you trying to protect your nest, whether it's exercise, stress reduction, sleep, how you think, protecting your emotions, your relationships, what part of your future, what part of your life are you going to focus on over the next 12 months?
Well, I am going to continue my trying to maintain this elevated metabolic health that I've achieved. My other comorbidities, by the way, was I had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, because I don't drink, no drugs. I'm already silly enough, as my daughters will surely attest. So anyway, I didn't realize at the time that high fructose corn syrup causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And it's now they're talking, I have a whole chapter 15 is liver disease and kidney disease. And it's like they're talking about 1 in 3 globally have the NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty livers, and that was because I had this elevated GGT. I was eating, and the GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. Um, I didn't know that. I was looking at my pantry. It was like, wow, I see a high fructose corn syrup there. None of the cells in the body can metabolize it, but so it all goes to the liver and it stores up fatty. And the reason why that's important to bring up, this gamma glutamyl transferase, or GGT, and doctors don't check it. They seem to be oblivious about it.
Yeah, that's right.
They may check the ALT, ASP, ALT, and they don't check the GGT. Why is that important? Life insurance companies, they're not so interested in medical science. They just want to know who to accept, who to reject. And their number one predictor of all cause mortality is having elevated GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. I'm thinking, well, if the insurance companies know this, why doesn't the medical community know this? I mean, it's like, oh my God. So anyway, yeah, so that was that. And I also had osteoporosis, beginnings of osteoporosis. I have a whole chapter on that, on bone issues and osteoporosis. So I had these 4 comorbidities: the diabetic physiology, the heart disease, the NAFLD, and the osteoporosis. And using the research that I discovered in this how-to book that I wrote, I was able to reverse all 4. Anyway, so my goal is to see when you have a heart attack. What I discovered when I was on, I was talking about this with Dr. Philip Ovedi, a heart surgeon, and
Yes, absolutely.
he's done over 3,200 heart surgeries. And we were discussing the fact that when you have a heart attack, you have permanent damage to your heart. Nobody knows how much or to what degree or how many months or years it might chop off your lifespan. So I thought, okay, so I found that out and I thought, okay, so what can I have control over? What can I be cause over? And I thought, well, I'm going to get into the most superior metabolic health as I can possibly achieve. And then, I first found keto and then I went ketovore and then I went carnivore. And I had a big misunderstanding about that. I thought when people said carnivore, they only eat meat. And I discovered that's called the lion diet because lions don't eat eggs and
Right,
salmon. And,
right, right.
So anyway, yeah. So the carnivore is just animal products, right? Whether it's eggs, beef, butter, salmon, cheese. It's just, so I eventually arrived there and my numbers, are brilliant. They're just, I'm in great metabolic health. I hit the gym every other day and, that kind of thing. So,
That's what I'm talking about. It's a balance. It's looking at everything is evolving as you've kind of evolved with how you have been eating. And I think that approach is why I have a podcast called Protecting Your Nest, so we can think beyond just low carb, keto, and carnivore. So I really
yeah.
have enjoyed you. I thank you for the opportunity to just spend a little time with my audience, and I'm looking forward to continuing to share your book because we need a tool that's easy to swallow and impact our decision making. So obviously, you're going to be on Amazon. Any other places people need to know to get your book and or to find you?
Well, what you can do is go to danieltrevor.com. I have near the top of the page, I have this 7-minute video that gives my story and some of the shocking information you've heard in this last little bit
That's
with
right.
you.
That's right. That's right.
And there's a lot of information there. I've got all of, a lot of the podcasts that I've done. At the top of it says video podcast. And I've got, Dr. Ovadia and Dr. Ken Berry and all the rest of them. I got about 20 of them there so far because the book's only been out since early this year. And there's a lot of information there. And what I offer is a free preview of the book, which is the first 48 pages, right? And you sign up, you get it on the mailing list because once a week I'll send out an update of this or that. So you get on the mailing list. I send you a PDF. Well, not me. It's kind of automated, as you know, in this modern day and age. And you get shot a PDF of the first 48 pages. And I ask people, I say, look, just read the introduction alone, and then you'll know right away if you're interested in seeing more and if this is for you. And then you can click to go buy it. It's now it's an international bestseller. I'm so delighted that it's getting out there. It's the audio book is out now as of a couple of months ago, and it debuted at #1. And it's I maintained since early this year number in the top 10 for heart disease, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and longevity. So I'm really thrilled about that people are finding it because, when I did that one with Ken Berry, it went viral. I was like, wow, I got to do more of these podcasts,
Yeah,
so to
that's
keep
right.
getting the word out there. It's just like any product or service that you have in life. You got to market it, right?
That's right.
And
That's
if
right.
I can come on with somebody, a brilliant guy like you, and share these things with your audience and say, look, I'm just a lower class street kid from Philly who learned how to study well. And I was able to figure out, get my book, read, look, you don't get rich writing health books, believe me, but you do. I've become very wealthy in my heart,
That's
hearing
right.
back from all these people around the world that are improving their lives. And that's how that's the richness. I mean, when you have a bestseller book, you know, I always thought that, well, there's got to be some Ferrari money around here, right? And
No, I don't
it
work.
ain't that way at all. You got to write like, Harry Potter or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's got to be that. Yeah,
Then
I
you get
had to.
helicopter money.
Yeah. I've
So
talked
anyway,
about this, Dr. Georgia Eat included, and it's not what people think. Although you make a few bucks, but it's not. It's about purpose. So
Yeah,
thank you
yeah, yeah.
for
So anyway, there's a lot of information there, danieltrevor.com. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Tony. I really appreciate what you're doing because you're a clinician. You're
that's right.
face to face with the people and you're helping them change their lives. So
That's right. And that's
big
what we're
hugs to you, my brother.
well, I appreciate you and thank you so much. And I encourage my audience to check out that wonderful unholy book you wrote and
Unholy Trinity. Yeah, there we go.
Unholy Trinity. So and for those who joined us today, we discussed the three main barriers to achieving metabolic health. Carbs, sugar, and seed oils in excess are causing many of the diseases that we worry about. They're the root cause. So we need to understand that and address, what we need to do to not make that a significant part of our diet. So I encourage all of you to spread this message and educate others about the importance of making simple dietary changes. So you can do that with Daniel's book, Unholy Trinity. You can support the Metabolic Revolution rally on October 13th. I'll provide links to both. Just remember that metabolic health is very achievable with the right knowledge and choices. So let's work together to create a healthier community by promoting healthy eating habits. I really want to thank each and every one of you and my guests for your commitment to improving metabolic health. And until we do this again, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.